I mean, if I live my life, I was saying before, if I go back, I would be the person that I am today.
Absolutely.
Who I am. And I'm so grateful to have lived this life, the life that I'm being given. And I think that I know you would take it and you would go very far. And I'm saying this in public because I want you to do it. I was said to Brandon, I know you will be in CNN, man. I know I can see it. I can see you doing that.
Absolutely.
And doing this.
Right.
Because this is the things that people we need to bring outside. Sometimes we give people, okay, you need to take the SAT, you need to take this, you need to do this. But learning people's story could be a game changer.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the B-Xcellent podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Brandon Harrison Smith. Today, I have the honor of interviewing Dr. Luciano Castillo, who is an endowed chair at Purdue University's Mechanical Engineering Department. He's also a distinguished alumni from the State University of New York at Buffalo. And more importantly, he's my advisor. So welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Brandon. And I don't want to say this. I'm very proud of you for creating something so excellent and needed right now in academia.
Thank you. Before we get into some of the questions about your journey or your STEM advice, I'd just like to start simply. Where are you from? What's your background?
Food, I think what was so excited was when I was a child, my father, he immigrated from Dominican Republic. And then he started from the police, became a salesman, until later became an entrepreneur. So being the second of four and the oldest man, it meant that I had to work with him and do my schoolwork exceptionally well.
Absolutely.
So at that time, I did not appreciate it because I felt like, hey, I'm being treated like a slave. I'm being working weekends and this, and you pay me this little money. But I became to realize what I am now. I mean, doing business with your father, and I think I started like 9. I learned how important it was to service others, how you're doing this to help somebody. And that make a very important print in my life. The way I am today, everything. I started from that. So the principle of work ethics, I learned from my father at that time. So at that time, I did not appreciate it. You know what it is? When you're a teenager and you had to get up at 7 to go to work. And when you went out the night before. So it was very rough, but that is where I learned my work ethics, everything that I am.
Yes. I can definitely relate to that. I think my dad is definitely someone that serves as my foundation of what a work ethic is. This guy, he's phenomenal. He wakes up early, he works out, he trains, he does his job. Then sometimes he does a second job after his first job.
Wow.
Comes home. He's definitely, his work ethic is inspiring, and I think, when you're younger, you don't appreciate it because you feel like you're working like a dog all the time with these projects or things you got to do. But then it built the foundation for who you are later on.
Exactly.
It actually serves as something very special that people even notice about you.
In fact, I would tell you this. My conclusion was when I compare my childhood versus my children, it's too bad that my children did not have a father that they did not grow up in a business.
Oh, I see.
Because I had to be part of it. The family had to be doing everything.
Right. There's a bit of a grind that comes with it.
Right. As a child now, you go to your activities and you watch TV, you play video games. In that era, you need to work.
Yes.
And like you, right? Your dad is pumping iron. You need to match the old man, right?
You got to match the intensity for sure.
That's right.
For sure. That's great. My next question to you is what is the first experience you've had with STEM? What really got you started on this journey?
Brandon, this is a great question. And I was reflecting when I was the last 2 nights about our podcast today. And something goes back to my father. And I tell you, he had businesses in Puerto Rico. And one day we were going to visit a client and they were in the south part. So there's a refinery. And he was driving. I must have been 9. He says, you see all of that? That meaning the refinery. Yeah, that is designed and done by an engineer, chemical engineers, and they solve problems. That's what he said. I mean, you're talking about a guy that was a police that became an entrepreneur. At that moment, that's when I decided I want to be an engineer.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, That's what I decided. In fact, because I remember when I was in high school, I was struggling if I should go to medicine or to go to engineering. And I didn't want to, I love medicine, but I didn't want to have to touch people. But I didn't know what I know now, that you could have done an MD, PhD.
Yes.
And do research in medicine. But at that time, I said, hey, engineering sounds cool.
Yeah.
But I loved it. And that's where my passion became. And when you're working with him, you were fixing cars, tires, you were solving problems.
Yeah.
Every time you were dealing with clients, I was solving problems with the employees as well. That's my first experience with them.
Okay. And so from there, you started eventually you got to the University of Puerto Rico at MIAGES and then transferred. Can you tell us a little bit about that journey?
Yeah, I started at the University of Puerto Rico, Mayagüez. I started studying math. And then after 2 years, I transferred to another university, Polytechnic University. And then I said, no, this is not what I want. I really wanted to learn why things where the questions came from. When I would study, I wanted to learn why this is this equation. So I then transferred to Buffalo, SUNY Buffalo. That's where I did my undergrad and my PhD in mechanical engineering. And actually, this goes back to what I was saying about my father, right? This is my childhood, right? And this is very important because parents play an important role as role models, like your dad, but also as mentors. So my last year in undergrad, I met my PhD advisor. I met this guy, actually. He was so passionate. It was a class of propulsion, gas dynamics. That was gas dynamics. Okay, so we're looking at compressible flow and in thermo. And then he was talking. I remember I would see this white guy, like 6'2", and very young, and be so animated and passionate. And I remember in the class, he would be saying, I could not sleep last night. I was awake at 3 a.m. looking at this problem. And I said, you know what? I would like to be like him. So I went and talked to his PhD student. How can I become his student?
Oh, wow.
And that's how I ended up in grad school. And then his PhD students told me, well, I don't think master students could work with him because he doesn't hire masters. He only hires PhDs. But I imagine that at those days, I could not picture myself doing a PhD. So long story short, over time, I enrolled into the master program, and I enrolled into law independent studies with him, with Dr. George. His secretary, he emailed me and he says, you can't do that. So I make an appointment with his secretary, and then she set up a meeting with him. Remember, this is Luciano, the 24-year-old. I was afraid to go to a professor. I never asked any questions. So to have to go to this guy speaking in English and a white guy, I was so intimidated. I was afraid, terrified.
Right.
And he invited me for breakfast. We have coffee, we talk. And he was the best person I ever met. Super nice. And that's how I ended up in master. And then later he said, you should do a PhD. Let's forget about the master. So went straight to PhD. That role models are critical. And actually at the core of everything I do, it goes around that, mentoring and being a role model. And role model doesn't have to be people that look like you.
So, absolutely. No, that's a fascinating story.
Yeah.
I took two things from that. One, it's important to have questions or just a natural curiosity when you pursue education, period.
Yes, and life.
Yes, and life. And life, for sure.
I think is being curious is at the core of discovering the majesty of this universe.
Absolutely.
Of life.
Absolutely.
So when you approach life with that, I think you will be a better researcher because you will be curious about learning something new.
Another takeaway I had just now was if you're interested in working in someone's lab, go ahead and talk to the grad students. Talk to them. They're going to probably be the most insightful to your experiences.
That's correct. Probably the best feedback you will get it from them. Remember, the advisor may want to impress you, may want to hire you. The students will tell you the real story, how they're treated, how comfortable they feel. And just don't talk to one, talk to few.
Talk to many for sure.
Yeah, some labs have a different culture, and I want to mention this. Like any academic institution, the institution have its own culture. The labs have their own culture, and not every culture fits who you are. So this is very important to talk to many people because their advisors, they micromanage students. Maybe for a style of a student that like that, that may work.
For sure.
But for somebody more creative, that may not be the best fit.
I just wanted to add something to that. So I think it's important to talk to both groups because you're going to establish different relationships. There's the culture you're going to need to have with your professor, but there's also the culture you're going to need to have the lab. So maybe it's not even just the professor. Maybe the professor is great, but the lab culture is not, and not conducive for you to work or do. And so that's important too, because you're going to spend quite a bit of time with these people, and they're going to need to be people that you feel comfortable working with.
But it's the professor who set this stage.
Ah, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's the professor because he or she creates the atmosphere and hires students with certain type. At least I do.
For sure. So now your PhD was in propulsion.
It was mechanical engineering. It was mainly in turbulence. Turbulence. I focused on turbulence. Very theoretical. It was looking at scaling laws of turbulence applied to boundary layers. Looking at, if you look at an airfoil, look at it in the atmosphere, there's a closed surface. Understanding the interaction of turbulence with the wall.
Okay. Can you give an example about that for some of the layman audience? Like when we're talking about boundary layers, why is that important to kind of explore or kind of understand even at a theoretical level?
It's super critical because it's what happens between the flow field and the surface that will determine how much drag an airplane will need, how much heat that surface will have. So almost every problem dealing with cooling, heating, hypersonics is dealing with that interaction with the wall, that boundary layer.
Okay. So like how fast the airplane wants to go.
The interaction
of the air.
Right. But then if you're looking at other problems like wind energy, look at the problem of wind energy, even solar panels, right? You have the wind flow over the panel, very close to the wall. There's a region where a lot of cooling and heating is taking place between the fluid flow and the wall. The efficiency of those panels is that interactions. In wind energy, you have the performance of the power plant, right? Okay. You're taking kinetic energy from the flow to produce electricity. That is within the boundary layer. You have the atmospheric boundary about one kilometer. Within that, you have the boundary where the wind turbines are sitting, and that heating and cooling will take place there. Urbans, CO2 emissions in cities is the interaction of a boundary, the wall with the fluid flow.
Okay.
So it's the fluid flow with the proximity to the wall.
Proximity to the surface of...
To the surface, right.
Of whatever structure you're talking about, whether it be a plane or...
Correct. And that's where molecular diffusion, the viscosity becomes important. Mm-hmm. But then if you have turbulence, now you have turbulence diffusion processes that also play a very, very important role. Mm-hmm. So you want to use that to minimize the drag, the energy consumption. Submarines, they operate with that principle as well.
So your lab is basically a wind energy lab. Well, I mean, you do other things, but like that's primarily what you're known for.
Yeah. So look what happened, right? So I went from, and I will tell you that story because this is very important, but basically, I was thinking as an assistant professor when I started my first job, actually in 1999 in Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. That's where I spent 12 years. But when I was there, I was just doing a little bit of extension of my PhD, right? I was doing classical scaling laws of boundary layers. We were looking at more computational part. But then one day, one of my PhDs was going to Johns Hopkins. And then I was talking to my friend, Charles Meneval. We were going to co-advise a postdoc. We were trying to define a problem. So we're looking more of classical turbulence problems, right? And then I went to visit one of my colleagues. I was just coming from my office to the upper office. And I saw one of my colleagues. And I said, "Hey, Mickey, what are you doing?" And he said, "Well, Luciano, I'm writing a proposal that is due next week." "Yeah, what kind of proposal?" "Well, there's a new program from NSF that is called Energy for Sustainability that just came out." So I look at the call. I called Charles. "Hey, Charles, there's this new call for Energy for Sustainability. And I know you and me, we always wanted to do something on renewable energy." We started exploring. And then that's how we ended up with wind energy. And it was mainly because I did not want to train a postdoc on something that will make it hard for him to build a career. That single decision, this is 2006. That's when I started doing wind energy. That single decision to do it because you want to help a student and how the universe connect and the messages, right? I opened my eyes and then we moved to wind energy because look at this. When you look at turbulence, there's a lot of turbulence within the wind turbines. You have a machine rotating. The flow behind that is very turbulent. So you have turbulence, you have a boundary layer. And I'm like, hey, you have the things that I love.
Right.
And that's how I ended up in wind energy.
Wow.
That single decision changed my life.
Wow.
That one.
Speaking of students, what kind of students do you look for when selecting students, whether it be students who are just generally interested or postdocs or PhD students? What kind of students are you looking for? What traits?
Normally I don't look at even GPAs. I don't look at the resumes, nothing. I'm looking at the person and I'm trying to find, one, is this person hungry enough? That's what I'm trying to judge. And then if he or she will be a kind of persistent student that will, no matter what happened, will continue. And that's what I'm looking. I'm looking for persistent. I'm looking for passion. And I'm looking for somebody that we stick to it. And because it's a long journey.
Yes.
I mean, when you do a PhD, you spend 5 years. I mean, there's students that I met when they were teenagers, 19 years old, 18, 20 something years later, we're still friends. So this is very a long-term commitment with people. So I pick people that are very driven, hungry, and that they're also passionate. That for me are the ingredient for success.
Absolutely.
Not just in PhD, in any field.
If a student was interested in joining your lab, what's the way to get involved, for them to get involved? What's the best way?
Yeah, normally I like the students, if they're at Purdue, to do undergrad research. That's one way. They could work with my PhD student, with you, or, you're a postdoc. But there are others that could get involved with the Summer Institute. Every summer at the Summer Institute. This last year we did it on climate change and coastal resiliency. And that's the best way to do it.
All right. So speaking of Summer Institute, so that's part of this Blue Integrated Partnership that you're a part of. Can you explain more about how you got involved in that and what that exactly is?
This is a consortium, actually. As you know, I have always been very passionate about giving. At the end of the day, if what I'm doing is not serving society, one more paper means nothing to me. So everything that I do has to have something in society. Every questions that I do in research is driven by something that is happening in society that I feel I could make an impact. So this consortium, I think many of us will come from humble beginnings, and the road is hard. My job is not only to succeed as a faculty, but can I make the road better for others? A lot of people in our community are left behind. A lot of people with great talent are not being tapped. So when I was in RPI, I want to mention this story. I created a consortium with Cornell, Syracuse, University of Puerto Rico, RPI, and later we added Johns Hopkins to put more minorities in academia at that time. And I learned a lot about mentoring, creating programs. When I came to Purdue from Texas, I saw that I could make a very unique contribution at Purdue, and that is in creating these summer programs. But then one time NASA invited me to be part of a panel discussion about what are the things that needs to be created at the national level to create a STEM pipeline. And during that time, that's what I learned. And with discussions with other people, that we need to create a consortium. And I have done it before, like the one that I did at an RPI. This was mainly R1 institutions with Puerto Rico. Here it's like, hey, Purdue has this amazing facility, great resources, great history. Why not to partner with HBCUs and minority serving institutions to help them elevate their ability to do research so they could also grow? Many times a place like Purdue will partner with another school. And of course, we want to get minority students. This is not to just do that. This is to enhance their institutions, enhance their community. So we created this consortium. And actually, this was supported by Tom Fu.